Hello and welcome to Face to Face. Our guest today is Mehdi Najari. Mehdi is a longtime activist here in Victoria. He's worked on a lot of issues, mainly environmental, but certainly political and peace as well. We're going to be talking about a lot of different issues, but it all falls under the umbrella of what Mehdi calls the illusion of democracy. And I think this is of fundamental importance to all of us. Mehdi, maybe you can begin by telling us what you mean by the illusion of democracy.
I think, Jack, after I've been here for 23 years, I was also in the United States for 10 years, going to university there. What I realized after being here for some time is that people are getting it wrong. The assumptions, in order to understand what's going on politically or environmental policies or social policies, in order to understand why it's happening things the way it's happening, we need a frame of reference. And the frame of reference that Western people, Canadian, have is through the frame of democracy, that we live in a democracy, that our government is elected by the people for the people and paid by the people. That's not the case. Because as long as we look through that prism on any issue, we are going to get it wrong. So the basic assumption has to be challenged. And as long as we don't challenge those basic assumptions of democracy, we live in a democracy and we have the right to go, if we don't like the government, and change it and bring a government that we want. If we agree with that assumptions, then we get it wrong. That's why every time we go to the election and choose another government, we get the same thing. And we have to question that. So that is what I mean by illusion of democracy.
Well, it so happens that I agree with you 100%.
I think that's why you invited me.
Yeah. To me, one of the important points is that we wonder why we seem to be keeping going in what I would call the wrong direction. More and more people are in debt. We have more and more homeless people. We have more and more privatization of public assets, which is something I don't like. We're involved in a war. More and more homeless on the streets. And I think the general assumption is we're trying our best. Our governments are trying their best to deal with these problems, but it's just not working. But I think what you're saying is we've got it all wrong. What we're seeing around us is exactly the plan. The government and the politicians don't work for us. They work for, in fact, the corporations and the richest people in the country and the province.
And that's exactly, if we are not the hegemon, if we are not the controlling influence of our politics and social policy, economic and environmental policy, who is it? And I suggest that it's corporations. That's why the whole structure, the whole web of control are not talking about or focusing on corporate interest. We see in every aspect of our life. For example, we are in Afghanistan. For how long? Since 2001. And since 2006, January 2006, we have been heavily involved in war in Afghanistan. Let me remind you that between 2001 and 2006, we lost 8 soldiers, 4 of them in friendly fire, 2 of them in accident, and only 2 in firefight. Since then, we have lost more than 150, in the war. So why are we there? They say we are there because we want to bring democracy to people of Afghanistan. We love these. We love women are under oppression and suppression. We want them. But they never talk about the corporate interest. Let me remind you, the same brutal Taliban that they are fighting now, they were a special guest of George W. Bush, the governor of the state of Texas, and the Unical Corporation in December of 1997. How many people in Canada know that? And the question is why? If the media is there to inform us and create awareness among the public, why that fact has been covered up? They were there in order to get, Unical wanted to get an agreement from Taliban to build the gas pipeline from Turkmenistan to Indian Ocean, through Afghanistan and Pakistan to Arabian Sea and Indian Ocean, to get their hands on that gas. And when the Taliban refused to give them, they threatened the war. In fact, in May of 2001, before 9/11, United States sent an ultimatum to Taliban that if you don't wise up and act according what we want, we are going to invade your country. This is before 9/11.
So you're saying that the government of the United States officially informed the government of Afghanistan, the Taliban, that prior to 9/11, that if they didn't give them what they wanted on the issue of, I think it's natural gas, right? That there was going to be trouble.
And
now, people may or may not agree with that, but I think the important point is, or one important point is, that at least that should be in the debate in Canada, but it's never mentioned in the media.
Exactly, because the narrative, the lies, is that we are there for help, to help people. We are not there for that, for democracy. We are spending billions of dollars instead of on our social ill, instead of spending on our education for our children, for example, free education through university for our children, because if you create an educated society, you have a much better economic outlook for the people of Canada. But instead of using that money for that, we are giving it to American arms manufacturing corporation and having a fight there, killing people. And when you see, for example, they had this in 2008, they had this inquiry, John Manley inquiry. They were so-called independent inquiry into what to do in Afghanistan.
Now, maybe we can just say that the government, the Harper government, set up a so-called independent panel under the leadership of John Manley to take a look at Canada's role in Afghanistan and what we were doing and what we should be doing.
What should we do in terms of to be more effective in our whatever the goal is? We see that the so-called independent panel consists of every member that was in that independent panel were either from a big corporate interest, like a pipeline industry. For example, Mr. Bernie, Derek Bernie, was involved with pipeline industry. Jack Etkin, the Minister of Mines during the Mulroney government, were heavily involved with those type of businesses. Pamela Wallin was in the board of director of Oil Sand Quest, one of the biggest holders of the oil sand property, the tar sand properties in Saskatchewan and in Alberta. So every member, were involved with big business interest. And just recently, we find out that they were talking about that more than $1 trillion of mineral wealth is in Afghanistan. This was known long time ago because the Russian report when Russia was in Afghanistan in 1980s, they published all the mineral wealth, but they never talk about it. So my issue is that the corporate interest, every decision we make, they create a panel. The only views that is in that panel represented is corporate views. The ordinary public views are not represented, and then they call it independent panel.
And the media presents. No matter what people think, a lot of people think we should be in Afghanistan, a lot of people think we shouldn't be in Afghanistan. But it's up to the media and the politicians to at least present us with the reasons why we are there. And a lot of people believe it's all to do with this mineral wealth that was suddenly discovered a few months ago, even though it was widely known for a decade or more. And the natural gas pipeline. I mean, there are many experts in the field who say that's the main issue, but the media never presents it to us like that. And the media is corporate.
And documentation of that are in 1980s. We have lots of document that show United States had a strategic interest there, economic and political geostrategy in Afghanistan and in Central Asia. But none of those discussion, none of those issues is being discussed. And so the question is, the media, as one part of this web of control, to dumb us down, to make us uninformed, but their definition is to make us, to bring information to us. And that's not happening. There is three forces. Hayam Saban, one of the big tycoons, Israeli-American tycoons, recently, when they asked him, how do you make sure that the support for Zionist project in Israel continue in United States and Western country, he said there is three things that we do, and it's important to note those three. One is giving lots of money to political parties, so to buy out the political parties. Second thing is to create think tanks. And through which are the really pressure group. The think tanks are pressure group because that's their job. They give them money, they hire them, and these people day and night pushing their agenda. For example, the Canadian Taxpayers Association. Their agenda is to get the tax cut. And when you get the tax cut, you reduce the income, revenue to the government. And when there is a deficit, what do the government do? They go after the social program and cut that. So what they are doing eventually, you see the corporate tax is reduced. The public tax, the ordinary citizens, the working people tax are reduced. But at the same time, the fees are going up, so they are not better off. Actually, they are paying more taxes through fees. And you see, for example, GST, they brought GST and not HST. All of those was the reason to cut the corporate tax, and transfer it to the public. So, since 1960s, when the corporate tax, the revenue from government revenue from corporate taxation and the income tax of the ordinary working people were bringing almost 50-50, the amount of money to the government coffers. You know how much is today?
Well, first of all, I want to say that most people have never even seen the graph, but I've seen that graph and those charts that say exactly that. Back in the 1950s, the amount of revenue that the government got from corporations and from individuals was virtually 50-50. And today, I don't know, but I would say it's 85% people and 15% corporations.
The predicted, something in that range, the predicted income for the year 2010-11 for the government of Canada is about $127 billion from income tax. Corporate income tax is about $25 billion, and $27 billion from GST and some other taxation. So it's about almost 1/6, 1/5 or 1/6 of what was equal in 1950s. So with all this hoopla about we are going to put more money into your pocket whenever they brought the tax cut, the whole agenda is really not to cut your taxation or my taxation. The agenda is to cut corporate tax. Let me give you another example. 2006, the Harper government came to power. They promised to cut the GST by 2 cents. So the first year, they cut it by 1 cent. At the same time, under the cover of cutting the tax for every Canadian, Their agenda was to cut corporate tax from 22.5% in 2006 to 15% by 2013.
So the tax rate on corporations is going to fall from 22% down to 15%.
Exactly. So that's a huge tax cut. But when they gave that 1 penny GST cut, Mr. Flaherty went to the finance minister of the provinces and told them, now you have an opportunity to raise your income tax, PST tax by 1% and cover that, get that money. So the agenda, I mean, this was written in the report very clearly. This man is peddling to increase the taxes of ordinary citizens because he cut the GST. At the same time, in the same tax cut, he raised the taxation rate for the lowest income earner from 15% to 15.5%. That brought additional $4.5 billion to the government coffer. This is a Robin Hood in reverse. He gave the corporation tax cut, but in 2006, he raised the lowest tax bracket from 15% to 15.5%. And also, he went and reduced the start of income tax. It was around 9,000 something, and he reduced it to 8,000 tax right, the free tax for the income.
Like your basic
deduction. And he reduced that, and he got more from the poorest of the poor, the lowest income tax bracket. So this was an attack on poor and struggling people and middle class. Now they are after middle class. So with all their propaganda that you hear in the media, corporate media and CBC, the facts showing very differently, that they are cutting the taxes for the corporations and increasing the fees and taxation on ordinary citizens. At the same time that they were cutting the taxes of corporations, Mr. Flaherty went to the finance ministers of the provinces and pressured them to cut their portion of corporate income tax. For example, in New Brunswick, the tax in 2007 for the corporation was 14%. By 2012, it's going to go down to 8% for corporations. Pretty soon, the corporations are not going to pay any taxes if we continue in this way. And who is creating this atmosphere for people to accept this nonsense? Is a group like Canadian Taxpayers Association.
Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Yes.
And the role of the media is that you see every week, for example, here in Victoria, the CFAX is a corporate radio, call itself the News Authority. But every week on Monday morning at 10 o'clock, they have a half an hour or sometimes 1 hour talk with the representative of Canadian Taxpayers Federation. And they call the program as a reality check. So every week, the representative of Canadian Taxpayers Association tell people how important it is to cut the taxes and cut the government expenditure. So you see, people are not being informed about what's really going on. That the corporations, these think tanks and the media are working hand in hand with the politician to cut the taxes of corporations and increase the fees and the tax for the ordinary citizens.
And it's worth mentioning that also cutting the taxes for the wealthiest people in the province and the country, their taxes are also going down substantially. We're talking about the illusion of democracy, the idea that, in fact, we don't have a real democracy in Canada. Our governments do not work for us. They're controlled by the corporate sector. They're controlled by corporate Canada. The media plays a role. The media is basically owned by corporate Canada, and their role is to misinform and manipulate public opinion by telling us, for example, that corporate taxes have to go down. They're so overtaxed. They have such a hard time. Whereas, in fact, we've been cutting their taxes for the last 50 years, and the more we do it, the worse off the rest of us become, but somehow that part of the story never gets told. So, Mehdi, following on this idea of the illusion of democracy, of course, a very big part of that is the political parties, the people we elect to govern us. They're supposed to be elected to govern us the way we want to be governed, but somehow that doesn't really seem to happen. Maybe you can just talk a bit about the role the various political parties play in this game of pretend democracy that we have here in Canada.
See, they have to create this illusion in public mind that they have choices. If you don't like, for example, Van der Zalm government, you can choose Mike Harcourt government, a progressive government, supposedly. And they are very different. They are toward left and Van der Zalm is right. So there is this dichotomy that you have the choice. But the question is, do we? Are these really differences are real? So if you look at the 1991 election of Mike Harcourt and 10 years of NDP government, I knew before the election that Harcourt is not going to do what is promising the public. I knew that he's phony, in my opinion, because there was a series of meetings that the media really didn't talk about it. I just heard a 10-second one day, and I said that's important. In the spring of 1989, there was a series of meetings behind closed doors between Mike Harcourt, the leader of the opposition at that time, with the industry's representative. After the spring of 1989, I saw a huge change in the media in terms of treatment of Van der Zalm social credit government and Harcourt. Harcourt start emerging in the media as a statesman, as a person reasonable, as a person that should be considered as a next premier, and Van der Zalm was attacked. I believe the deal was made. I asked that question before the election of 1991 from NDP officials. For example, one official told me, don't you want us, when I ask what kind of deal is made in those meetings, because Harcourt promising transparency. So tell us, what did you do? What kind of deal you made? One of the NDP, later become a minister, told me that everybody make deals. Don't you want to see us get elected? So why I am telling you this story is that there is not much difference between these parties, this illusion that there is, we have choices. Because when they come to power, for example, before they come to power, during the election, they promise that they are going to deal with the unfair taxation. For example, in one of their platform, they said, I'm reading from that.
And this is reading from the NDP platform
in 1991 election. For every $10 of BC income tax you pay, corporations pay only $1.90. And they were saying that is unfair. And so what do they say they are going to do? They said that reform and rolling back the manufacturer's sales tax to 9%. They are going to end unfair tax loopholes for the rich, introducing a minimum corporate federal income tax, maintaining higher sin taxes. They didn't really do none of those things in terms of going after rich and making the taxation more fair. What they did, they increased the corporate capital gain tax by 1%, and at the same time they raised the PST from 6 cents to 7 cents. That's a 16% increase in PST. Next year, when they asked Mr. Harcourt, how do you assess your first year in power and what you you did and what you regret? He said, the only regret I have to raise the capital gain tax by 1%. So between 1991 and 2000, when NDP was in power, I asked you, let's go and look at what kind of policies they implement. Is all to keep the gain for the corporations during vandalism intact and prepare the stage for another attack on social expenditure by the new right-wing government that will come after them, and giving corporations what they want. For example, in 1997, the Clark government gave Alcan Corporation 89% of the water of Nechako River, which is what Alcan is doing, creating electricity instead of using it to create job here. They are exporting it and making a huge profit. And
what you mentioned about the NDP's tax policies that they talked about prior to the election, and then what they actually did when they're in power, that's very important, because by talking about progressive tax policies, helping the poor, helping working people, they basically take control of that part of the electorate who thinks, well, yes, if the NDP gets elected, they're going to help me. But in the end, when they do get elected, none of it ever happens. But it stops a real party that really would do these things. They can't get a start because people think the NDP is going to do it. And we're in the same boat, I would think, today. We've had 10 years now of an extremely right-wing government, liberal government, the government of Gordon Campbell. They've moved us in what I would call a horrible direction against the interests of most people, for the interests of the richest and the biggest corporations. It seems like they're on their last legs. People are sick and tired of the Liberals, and there's a good chance that possibly the media will allow an NDP government to get elected next time, but they're not going to do anything.
The only NDP government that the establishment, the corporate interest and the media and the think tank allow to come to power is the government that are going to calm down the public anxiety about from the right-wing attack on their social fabric, and create an illusion that they are going to do something. They are not going to allow any government come to power that endanger the interests of corporate interests and elite. That's not going to happen. That's why we are not really free to elect our government. You see, for example, when Miss James come to power, what has she done? She's just collecting, a good salary and doing nothing in order to create a movement against a corporate assault on the fabric of our society implemented by Campbell government. Campbell government, for example, is putting us in debt for more than $50 billion just through one item of signing contract with this so-called independent power producer. Way into future, we are going to pay more than market price for electricity. And he already signed this and signing this agreement with these corporations. So we are going to be hooked in future to pay these corporations to sell us the water, the power from the public rivers, that we own. And what has NDP done in order to bring awareness? They make speeches and ask questions in the legislature. That's it. You think we got our healthcare system the way it is now, the public healthcare system, by Tommy Douglas make speeches in the legislation of Saskatchewan when he was in opposition? He went out there and created a movement. And this is not what these Carol James or the NDP government in Nova Scotia or the NDP government in Manitoba are doing. They are allowing these corporate policies to continue and get strongly rooted on the ground without challenging it or changing it. We don't have a real alternative to corporate interests. They don't allow it. And the real issue is that people realize that. As long as we have this illusion that we have choices, we are not going to search for real change. Because every time there are these groups like NDP, NDP party or liberals or whoever they want to call themselves, they are going to suffocate the public opposition to corporate assault on the fabric of our society. We saw, for example, the labor union leadership has a big role to play. In BC, the way things is going is a tripartite. When NDP come to power, is a tripartite government. The tripartite government of big labor union leadership working with NDP brass and corporations to manage us. Why am I saying that? You can go to a book called Union Jack, a book that is written as a mambo for Jack Monroe, and you see he talk about the tripartite government of the labor brass and NDP brass and big money, big corporation get together and manage us, and that's how really was the Mike Harcourt government or Clark government, tripartite government.
Maybe we can talk for a minute about the environmental policies under the Harcourt government, because when they were in power from 1991 to 2001, basically, the media always said the NDP is terrible on economic issues. They can't run a shoe store, which wasn't true. The NDP didn't do anything terrible economically. I mean, the economy of the world is basically what creates the economy of BC. The NDP didn't destroy anything, but that's the way the media presents it, that they're terrible on running the economy, so that way the liberals they can promote as the ones who know about business. But they give the NDP, they're the great ones on protecting the environment. And that was the myth that the media put out about the NDP for the 10 years that they were in power, that they took over a forest industry that was a disgrace worldwide and brought in lots and lots of new parks, huge amounts of protection of old-growth forest, and the best logging rules in the world. That was the illusion that was created for the people of BC. Now, personally, I don't think any of that is true, but do you agree that environmentally, when the NDP came to power, they had two choices, I think. They could have joined with the unions and the people of BC in creating a magnificent world-class logging industry that protected the forests and provided jobs. And instead, what the NDP did was they joined with the unions and the corporations to continue the massive destruction of our forests in order to maximize profit for the corporations.
One of the reasons they brought NDP to power in 1991 was exactly that. There was, if you go to the media and to the coverage of environmental issue during 1988, 89, you see that the huge majority of the public were fed up with destruction of the forest and an environmental problem we had. Created by corporations. So they brought Mr. Harcourt to power because he's promising a very different approach. But what's happened, what they really did, is, for example, he said that he's going to have a Royal Commission on Forestry, but he never instituted that. What he did, he created the core process that was governed by the interest of corporations, and instead of, for example, during the election, he said he's going to protect 12% representative ecosystem. That's very important word, representative ecosystem. But how much was really protected in Vancouver Island? Only 6%.
Maybe you can explain what representative ecosystems means.
Because the British Columbia consists of many different ecosystems. For example, southern Douglas fir, which is really highly endangered ecosystem. And Harcourt said, in order to, and that was really minimal. I thought around 25% should be protected to really have a chance to protect biodiversity in this province. So Harcourt promised to protect at minimum 12% representative of ecosystem. That means that from each ecosystem in British Columbia, at least 12% will be protected. So the high value timber, low elevation forests that have those giant trees in it, we thought at least we are going to get 12% protected. But that was not the case. Through a sleight of the hand, they and just public relations, they went back on that and only protect, for example, 6.5%. But at the same time, they talk about working forests. Suddenly the forest land, the natural forest, become a working forest, as if the nature is there to be exploited by the corporation.
It can't be lazy. It has to be out there working.
It has to be working. So what they did, and in the name of creating jobs, they accelerate the exploitation of high-value timberlands, forest lands. And you see, for example, the annual allowable cut, the amount of cut that can be allowed to sustain forest was about 50 million cubic meter. But during NDP government, they were cutting 70. But people were not paying attention because there were lots of rhetoric by Harcourt and his
But that rhetoric, I don't think, was that important. It was the media rhetoric, because that's the only message we really get. And the media told us over and over again, boy, the NDP is really, they're protecting the forest. There's huge numbers of parks, and it's true, a lot of parks were created, but always in the worst quality lands, the worst quality forests.
And these parks are not connected, because if you have a small pieces of parks all over, that means nothing in terms of ecology and protection of biodiversity, which is the basis of our life on this planet. So they created this in an uneducated minds of public, that we created lots of park. But what does that do? If we have one park, or we could have one huge park in British Columbia, the whole British Columbia become one park. That would be much wonderful than having all these small unconnected parks. That means nothing in terms of the ecological value. This, as I mentioned right at the beginning, the role of the media is not to inform us. The role of the media is to pull the wool over our eyes and help the implementation of corporate policies, the policies that may interest the corporations. That's their role. So again, they play their role perfectly in order to get what they want for their owners and masters.
Yes, and so once again, we're talking about the illusion of democracy, the idea that, democracy comes from the Greek words demos, the people, and kratia, to rule. Democracy means the people rule. And I think when most of us think that we live in a democracy and we have a democracy, we have this idea that we are the rulers of our country. Maybe we're not doing that good a job. Maybe our politicians are failing us. Maybe we could do better. But we do have a democracy. But what Mehdi and I are talking about is really the idea that all of this is an illusion. We, the people, are not the power structure in this country. It's the corporations that have become the power structure. And everything, not everything, they don't have 100% control of everything. But basically, the directions we go in, the things you see happening, the problems we face are deliberate. We don't have homelessness by accident. We don't have homelessness because we don't have enough money to build homes for poor people. We have homelessness because of deliberate decisions to transfer wealth away from our governments and the social programs that would solve that problem into the pockets of the corporations and the richest people in the province and the country. That's why we have homelessness. These are deliberate decisions.
Let me give you an example just recently, because people are more inclined to look at the recent incident. We had G20. In the G20, they were supposedly get together to deal with the economic ills that the corporations, through their sleight of hand work and through their treacheries created for us, So what do? They, instead of going and implementing a Tobin tax on financial transaction, which is a small tax of less than $1 for each financial transaction, which is is not going to hurt the big corporations. Instead of doing that and get lots of revenue from that to deal with the ills of disastrous economic situation that many countries have, and they created by corporations, what do? They oppose such a measure. These so-called advanced countries and IMF really dictating is that to go and attack on working people in each country. So they want to implement an austerity program. Mr. Harper, I think he's going to call an election in fall, because before he implements his austerity program that is really going to attack the fabric of our society one more time, he needs to get a majority government. And what they are doing just this week, we are in trouble financially. Not only they want to give in their budget, they want to give $5 to $6 billion this year and every year to come, tax cut to corporations, but just yesterday or the day before, they announced they are going to have, we heard in the news that they are going to spend $16 billion for military hardwares, ships and jet fighters. Why do we need a stealth bomber? Why Canada need a stealth bomber? The reason they want to buy these things, first of all, to militarize our society, instead of spending money on social expenditure that the people needs, they are putting money in the coffers of mostly American, our manufacturing corporation. Let me remind you, when Paul Cellucci, the first U.S. ambassador during George W. Bush, came to Canada, he later wrote in his memoir book about being ambassador in Canada, he said he has only one task to implement. And that one task was to raise Canada military expenditure. That was his only task by Bush administration. Go there and make them to spend more money on military expenditure. Because the money will go back to those corporations, through buying these instruments of war. So at the time that they are going to attack our society through a austerity program, they are willing to spend $16 billion. Let me give you another example of corporate control of our politics and how really democratic our governments are. In 2005, Paul Martin budget has about $5 billion corporate tax cut. Jack Layton, in order to make himself, don't lose any credibility with the membership of NDP, said that we won't support this budget, and Martin government was a minority government, need the support of NDP. We don't support this budget unless you take that, you eliminate that tax cut for the corporations and put it on social expenditure. And
so to me, that sounds like a good thing.
Very good thing.
Yeah, so instead, Layton and the NDP said to Paul Martin that if you want our support for your minority government, which you need, you're going to have to cancel a $5 billion corporate tax cut,
yes,
and spend the money on social programs instead.
Yes.
Okay.
So what's happened? the corporate CEOs and big business think tanks attack Martin. Said this is an unforgivable sin. Mr. Harper, the leader of opposition, called it the deal with the devil.
So Prime Minister Martin agreed to do what Leighton wanted.
Yes. So, but he was attacked by the media, by the corporate interest, by the corporate spokesperson, by the opposition, Mr. Harper. And I believe that was the downfall of Paul Martin in the next elections 8 months later.
Well, the downfall of Paul Martin was, of course, the sponsorship scandal. But the sponsorship scandal was nonsense. There was nothing there. There was no money. It wasn't, it was $100 million over 5 years, but it was blown up by this same media. When you begin to see, okay, there's a $5 billion corporate tax cut that Martin canceled, then you begin to see a reason why Paul Martin was gotten rid of. And I can remember seeing, especially in the Globe and Mail, pictures of Paul Martin time after time that just made him look like a fool. They were, when you have cameras following somebody around on a daily basis, basically 16 hours a day, it's not difficult to take pictures of that person that makes them look bad. And those pictures were run time after time. And I mean, we have to accept the fact that it's the media that chooses who our governments are going to be by the way they choose to present information to us.
And we saw what's happened during the election. For example, for the first time in the history of RCMP, 2 times the RCMP Commissioner, Mr. Jack Etkin, publicly announced that they are investigating a corruption case against Liberal Party. It has no substance, really. After the election, we find that there was no substance. But it was the way to destroy the Liberal Party campaign or the leakage of Liberal Party policies. During the election, there were all those leakage of Liberal Party policy that was embarrassing to Liberal Party in every announcement they had, because usually these announcements of the policies come for example, a party during the election say that we are going to announce our education policy. And 5 minutes before they announce it, they hand out the papers about education policy to the media that are gathering there. And they don't have really time to read and come with the hard, cold question. Usually the questions are softball. But in that election, there was all these embarrassing questions coming from the media, because the policies were being leaked. For example, the whole platform of the Liberal Party was leaked to Ezra Levant, this right-wing editor of the Western Standard magazine, which was the body of Mr. Harper. How could the policy of Liberal Party that was under lock and key be leaked to Ezra Levant, not to ordinary media, to Ezra Levant, the right-wing, So that was really clear to me that the corporate interest decided to get rid of Martin because of his not following the orders that they gave him, the marching orders they gave him.
Now, you may think that this is incorrect, and you may think that the two of us are crazy for making these kinds of suggestions, but surely in a democratic nation, at least there should be some debate about these kinds of issues, because a lot of people feel exactly as we do, that the corporations have tremendous power over everything political and over who is going to win our elections. But it's never discussed. It's as if that idea doesn't exist because it is never allowed to be mentioned.
Why Jack Etkin was not questioned about why he did what he did? There is a lots of thought. We don't have time here to go and answer that question. But there are other examples. Let me give you a recent example. In another so-called Western democracy, in Australia, just last month, there was a coup. They got rid of Kevin Rudd, the Prime Minister of Israel, through Australia, through a coup. And this man was elected with the super majority in a landslide election. But what's happened? Because of this economic situation, world economic situation, the IMF is pushing for austerity program. In order for Kevin Rudd to be comfortable to implement an austerity program to cut social expenditure, he also wanted to balance that with increased taxation on mining profit. That was not acceptable to corporations. Even the thought of that, even to put such an idea on the table. He was just putting it on the table. He didn't pass it. But even such a discretion, such an assault to corporate interest is not acceptable. So what do? The mining interest with Rupert Murdoch media empire and the union leadership, corrupt union leadership, like the one they have here, the same is over there in Australia, they all got together and created a coup.
How long did it take them from the time when, in your opinion, they decided to get rid of Kevin Rudd until that actually happened?
If you go to look at the analysis that has been done by wonderful analysts in Australia about what's happened, it took only about 3 weeks. They had a coup. They got rid of the elected prime minister, and they put somebody there that they can control by the name of Julia Gillard.
Now, folks, again, you may think that what we're saying is way off base. You may not agree. But surely these are the kinds of issues that have got to be put on the table by our media, by our politicians, by us, so that at least we can analyze them, look at them, and see if they're true. But, I mean, here in Canada, that whole issue just went basically unreported. I mean, the fact was reported that Rudd was gone, but did the corporations do it to him? Look how, I would say, they got rid of Stéphane Dion in exactly the same way.
Actually, there was a headline article in Sydney Morning Herald. The headline, I have it, I can present it to you, said that the tycoon took credit. The mining tycoon took credit of getting rid of Kevin Rudd. I mean, this is not a secret thing in Australia, and people are upset. And I don't think we should warn people that we are off base. We are not off base. We just ask people to look at the evidence. I'm sorry, if we don't look at the evidence, for example, the fact that the Taliban were in Texas, they were a special guest of Unocal Corporations, and George W. Bush was the governor of Texas at the time. This is not a conspiracy theory. We are just mentioning the fact. Everybody can go to their computer and Google the fact that Taliban in Texas, and you see the article by BBC. And there is many other things that today they call, in order to dismiss the issue and not discuss it in public, they say it's conspiracy theory. I am asking people, don't let them to pull the wool over your eyes with those kind of branding. Look at the facts. Go search for yourself. Go educate yourself, and you see there is no. The only conspiracy is a corporate agenda that is being conspired by corporate puppets to implement against the interests and wishes of people.
And we've got to keep this in mind. I mean, democracy is difficult, but it's the only hope we have. Democracy means that everybody's interests are at least represented and put on the table. And if a majority of people want something to happen, then at least we can be moving in those directions. But the way Canada is now, the way Canada is being run, there's a small elite, a small corporate elite, who control the politicians on most of the issues most of the time. They own the media, and they use their power to move our country in the direction they want it to move in. And I mean, a lot of people are suffering greatly because of this, and a lot more are going to be, because Mehdi mentioned the austerity programs that they intend to put forward. And austerity means that basically tough times are ahead. And why? Because they've taken all the money. They've taken the wealth. They've created an economic system that benefits them. The rest of us, they don't care about. And we're going to pay the price for that. And what we're saying is the democracy that we think we live in is largely an illusion. We simply don't have it. We may have had it at some point in time, but we certainly do not have it now, and it's fundamentally important that we try to make our democracy work. And there are things we can do. I mean, you know, number one is to take power away from the Prime Minister and the Premier. In Canada, so much power is concentrated in those people's hands. We've got to create free and independent media. We've got to make sure that what the people want is what happens.
And change the electoral system. See, for example, lots of people are not interested in the system anymore. You see the government of Harper got elected with 57% of the registered voters, not eligible voters, registered voters.
And that's how many people actually voted.
Yes, and the issue, for example, how Harper got elected, he implemented an ID policy that everybody has to bring their IDs. They knew when they implemented that policy in United States, the voters' participation went down, and usually those are the working class voters. And we saw, for example, the vote for Liberal Party went down by 600,000 votes, and that was why Harper became the Prime Minister, exactly for suppressing the voters' participation. We see that in every time the issue of proportional representation come to the public vote or public consideration to change the system, we see people from all political pundit, from all political party. For example, in British Columbia, the Liberal pundit, the NDP pundit, the Liberal Party, the NDP party, they all opposed it. They didn't support it. They didn't want a true representative assembly that represent the differences of opinion in the society. Why? Because that is dangerous to the interests of corporations. They created this phony duality for us, liberal versus conservative, or NDP versus liberal here in British Columbia. It's a phony duality. And through that, they control our society. If you have a representative legislature that the Greens and other point of view are going to be expressed, that is not going to keep the control of the corporate control intact.
Mehdi, unfortunately, we're almost out of time. We've been talking about the illusion of democracy. I think it's important that people keep it in mind. Keep in mind at least the idea that the democracy we think we have is not, in fact, the society we live in. We do have a lot of corporate control in this country and in this province. I think everybody knows that. And it's up to all of us to try to work to improve and build our democracy, a real democracy, because it can work and it is important. Mehdi, any last words? Question
all your assumptions. If you want to really get into the facts, to the truth, I ask people, don't accept the frames that they put in front of us, the prism they put in front of us to look at the world. Question that, and you will be successful.
Thank you very much. You've been watching Face to Face.